pressure mounts as the capacity and policies of President Tinubu comes under scrutiny. We dissect the latest coming from the Niger Republic and the Tinubu's interventions. And chieftain of the APC, Salihu Lukman, has written an open letter to President Tinubu, raising some concerns over the emergence of Governor Ganduje as the APC national chairman and the policy of his government. Hello everyone, welcome to the program. This is Politics Today live on Channels Television. I'm Sean Akinyemi in Abuja. Our special guest on the program tonight is a former Foreign Affairs Minister and a professor of political science, Professor Akinyemi. Will be speaking to us tonight on the program on the issues, the handling of ECOWAS and President Tinubu in Niger, the policies of this government, and some of the major national issues. Stand by everyone with me tonight. But first and foremost, let's bring you up to speed with what is happening. As of now, we now know what the mind of the president and that of the acting governor of the central bank is. That's Mr. Falashodun Shonubi, who has said that the Apex Bank will, in the next few days, be taking steps to improve the liquidity in the foreign exchange market. Mr. Shonubu met with President Bola Tinubu, who he said is concerned with the developments in the market and its impact on Nigerians. Take a listen to the acting CBN governor.
Mr. President was very concerned, or is very, very concerned about some of the goings on in the foreign exchange market. And one of the things we discussed were what could be done to stabilize and what could be done to improve the liquidity in the market and also the goings on in the various other markets, including the parallel market. We do not believe that the changes going on in the parallel market are driven by pure economic demand and supply, but are topped by speculative demand from people. Some of the plans and strategies which I'm not at liberty to share with you mean sooner rather than later the speculators should be careful, because we believe the things we're doing, when they come to fruition, may result in significant losses to them.
Before we go to Professor Akinyemi, let me bring you up to speed with what is happening around the country on your political roundup.
The leadership of the Nigeria Labour Congress has warned that it will embark on a nationwide indefinite strike action should the federal government allow another hike in the price of petrol amidst the ongoing negotiations. The president of the NLC, Mr. Joe Ajero, gave the warning at the African Alliance of Trade Unions executive meeting in Abuja. The meeting, which had in attendance labor executives from Ghana, Kenya, Senegal, and South Africa, also advised the ECOWAS leadership against the plans to deploy the military to Niger Republic to restore the democratic order.
Nigerian workers will not give any notice if we have not addressed the consequences of the last two increases, and we wake up from our sleep to hear that they have tampered with it.
Governor Abdullahi Isuli has sworn in 16 commissioners into the Nasarawa State Executive Council. Speaking during the ceremony at the Government House in Lafia, the state capital, the governor asked the new commissioners to adhere to the policies of his administration.
I try to therefore be dedicated patriotic and rise up to the challenges ahead. I want you to make this more than rhetoric, but actually in action.
Plateau State Governor Mr. Caleb Mutfwang is asking political appointees in the state to key into the vision of state development framework through cooperation and teamwork, which will help to achieve effective governance. The governor was speaking during a retreat organized for political appointees at the National Institute for Policy and Strategic Studies, Coup, Plateau State.
In order for us not to disappoint the people of Plateau State, we need to come together and understand ourselves and work as one unit.
The impasse between the factions of the Labour Party appears to have deepened as both factions elected separate principal officers to steer the affairs of the party in Lagos. Both factions are claiming to be the authentic body that should be recognized by INEC. The leaders spoke during separate inauguration ceremonies of the Lagos State executives of the factions in Lagos.
Please, play it to them that I say there is no going back. There is no going back. Aburi must go to court.
In the next few weeks, in the next few months, we are going to continue to take actions that will strengthen the party.
Some persons with disability are lamenting the impact of the removal of fuel subsidy on petrol on their lives. The co-chairperson of the Accelerate Disability Inclusion in Emergencies, Mrs. Grace Jerry, gave highlights of the impact during a media briefing in Abuja. Mrs. Jerry points to the increase in the cost of transportation, food items, healthcare and other essentials, and wants the federal government to include representatives of persons living with disabilities in the negotiation committee on fuel subsidy removal.
Thank you so much, everyone, for staying with us. Well, this open letter, which I'm about to read portions of it to you, might be a bit worrying for members of the APC, considering that the position the person who wrote the open letter holds in the party. It's the national vice chairman, northwest of the ruling APC, Mr. Salihu Lukman, who recently said he's resigned. And some leaders of the party said they've not accepted his resignation. He's written an open letter to President Bola Tinubu, accusing him of imposing another Muslim leadership on the party. Some part of that letter I've tried to break down for you. Some portion of the letter. First and foremost, the first signal that is written, the title of the letter is Disturbing Signals, and the very first one is about the competence of the national chairman of the APC, Abdullahi Ganduje. He says the emergence of Dr. Ganduje as national chairman of APC send the disturbing signal of being weakly committed to fighting corruption, and this is very troubling, and is not a representative of the interests of APC members, nor its representative the wider interests of Nigerians. He also spoke about a Muslim ticket or pairing or the replacement of in the party with Governor Ganduje and Senator Ajibara Basiru, who replaced Senator Adamu and Mr. Senator Iyola Omishore. Also, he raised the fear, what he called the fear factor in the APC. He said the fact that a lot of people are not able to speak up on what is happening in the party is worrying and disturbing. One of the other issues he raised is the fact that the policy of the Tinubu government is giving a lot of Nigerians pain, and in fact that some of these policies are going to throw Nigeria into a disturbing state. He also mentioned the fact that there are a lot of expectations on President Tinubu on the caliber and the persons he's going to appoint. But he said most Nigerians are disappointed. All of these are captured in a letter he referred to as disturbing signals. Well, let's tell you that some positive developments may be coming out of Niger Republic as far as the efforts of President Tinubu and ECOWAS is concerned, as the military junta in that country has indicated readiness for dialogue. However, the West African Committee, which is ECOWAS, today launched threats by Niger's military rulers to prosecute ousted President Mohamed Bazoum, saying this contradicted the regime's declared willingness to resolve the crisis peacefully. The coup leaders who toppled President Bazoum some days ago said that they had gathered evidence enabling them to prosecute President Bazoum for what they referred to as high treason and undermining the internal and external security of Niger. This is said was based on contacts Bazoum had with nationals, foreign heads of state, and officials in international organizations. They released a statement where ECOWAS today had said that he learned of the threat with which is worrying to them. Let's get some perspectives and, of course, some perspectives on the national issues. I'm being joined by a well-respected professor of political science and a former foreign affairs minister, Professor Akinyemi. He joins us live on the program from Lagos. It's good to see you, Prof. Thank you so much for joining us tonight.
Thank you, Sean, for inviting me to your program.
Thank you, sir. Let's begin the conversation on the Niger situation. And a lot of Nigerians will want to know there are developments which I've mentioned. Now, it looks like good news if the military junta says they're willing to talk and dialogue. But why is this a really different scenario? What happened in Burkina Faso and in some other countries within the region when democratic government were being toppled didn't get as much attention. But why do you think that Niger situation has gotten this kind of attention locally here in Nigeria?
Well, because you have to draw the line somewhere. The fact that something had succeeded in Mali, in Burkina Faso, in Guinea, much to the displeasure of ECOWAS. It wasn't that they accepted the coups that took place in those countries, but they simply found themselves in a position where they couldn't reverse the developments there. But this time, they decided that enough was enough. And I haven't had one single commentator, even those who are criticizing ECOWAS, I haven't had one single commentator applaud the fact that the coup took place in Niger. I think ECOWAS simply felt you have to draw the line somewhere, and that it is better drawn in the latest coup case. I must point out, because we have to get the narrative right. When President Tinubu was elected chairman of ECOWAS, obviously he laid down the parameters of his foreign policy there. And he said, under my watch, he was not going, at least he was not going to allow coups to take place. He was not going to allow terrorism to take place. Those were the two legs which he identified in Guinea-Bissau. There was then a pushback by civil society, by opposition parties, by human rights organizations, that you cannot just focus on coups and terrorism. How about looking at the causes, what leads to these coups? So by the time he then got to Nairobi at the mid-term summit of the AU and regional organizations, he then added a third leg, that they will pursue issues that will promote and advance democracy. So to that extent, you now had a three-leg proposal: be anti-coup, be anti-terrorism, and be pro-democracy. You must, look at the timeline. He was not expecting a coup. And believe me, if anybody tells you that they could foresee that a coup was going to take place in Niger-Bissau, that's just hindsight. Nobody expected that there would be that immediate coup in Niger, because there were no demonstrations. The economy was progressing. there was no crisis, there were no conflicts, at least that were open to any of us. And then the coup took place. What was ECOWAS supposed to do? Relax and say, oh, well, the coup had taken place in Mali, in Burkina Faso, and in Guinea, Conakry. Therefore, and they got away with it, we will allow Niger to also get away with it. It was just too close to the declarations in Guinea-Bissau and the declaration in Nairobi for ECOWAS not to react forcefully. And I keep telling people that President Tinubu has only one vote at the summit. Only one vote. Other African states, heads of states who are members of ECOWAS are not dummies. He could not bully them into supporting his stand. So that ECOWAS took a forceful stand on against the coupists in Niger. It must reflect the consensus of feelings, of attitudes within ECOWAS itself. And already we have evidence of that. Because at the last summit held in Abuja, if you look at the opening statement by President Tinubu, actually he laid more emphasis on dialogue, on diplomacy. But if you now listen to the statement by President Ouattara of the Ivory Coast, it was tough, it was strong, it was militant, and he seems to even have, if you like, pushed President Tinubu into a corner. That the feeling of ECOWAS is you draw the line here. So that is a long, if you like, winded answer to your question. Why Burkina Faso and why not in Niger?
Fantastic. So, I mean, as a Nigerian, millions of those who are watching right now, and they will be wondering, why should Nigerians be worried or concerned at all about what is happening in Niger, and especially as much as the concern of Nigerian leaders, especially President Tinubu, and we've seen the reaction of some northern elites and leaders and their intervention also. Why is Niger important to our national economy or security?
Look at the trajectory of coups in West Africa. In fact, West Africa seems to have become a belt of coupists. And if you're a head of state, sitting, whether you've been newly elected or you were elected a long time ago, and you see these coups creeping on, surely you will wonder about the condition in your own country, whether in Nigeria, whether in Cote d'Ivoire, whether in Senegal, wherever. You will wonder how to put a stop to the creeping phenomenon of coups. That's number one. Number two, yes, northern elements especially have been very vocal, and in fact, let me correct myself. Nigerians, whether in the north, in the south, or wherever, have been very, very vocal against the military component of the policy of ECOWAS. They felt that the military component being put on the table was too quick, that there should have been more emphasis on diplomacy, more emphasis on dialogue, probably more emphasis on economic sanctions before you start to talk openly about the military option. But there has been nobody, and I will repeat that, no commentator who had supported or approved or justified the coup that took place in Niger. So it's not just Nigeria. The question you really should ask me is, why is confronting the coupists in Niger, why is it important to ECOWAS? And because people keep saying that ECOWAS policies towards Niger is not Tinubu's policies, that it is ECOWAS policy towards the coupists. And I've just explained that you don't want a domino effect. Coup in Niger being the latest, in what other country? Again, will the soldiers be looking at what's happened in Niger and thinking, why don't we try it here? The only thing that will put a stop to the creeping coupism will be an effective stop to the coup in Niger.
So I'd like to follow up with the development that we saw, Prof. Now that they're willing, and they told us their grievances, the coup leaders in Niger, they told us about their grievances, and they wanted the world to know why they took the stand which they took earlier in the game. But there are those who fear, Prof, about a possible neo-colonial tendency, and are those who say maybe there are some whispering from some French European leaders whispering to some of the ECOWAS leaders about the way to go in Niger. And now we've seen the intervention or the handwriting of a possibility of some other non-state actors, like the Wagner Group. What do you make of the new developments, and perhaps is there a word of caution for our own president, those who say Nigeria's foreign policy is basically protecting the territorial integrity of our nation first?
Yes, of course. National interest trumps everything. But then national interest conceptualization could be directed at a danger from outside your border. And that danger does not have to be particularly military in terms of destabilization. I've explained why the coup in Niger was regarded by ECOWAS as a coup too far. Now, people have brought in all kinds of factors. One being, oh well, maybe it's the French. But in fact, evidence available showed that the coup in Niger was primarily motivated by self-preservation, that the deposed president was going to remove the commander of his guard, the Presidential Protective Guard. He was going to remove him. And so the man struck first before the president could implement that decision. That is really the primary cause of the coup. But having done that, of course, like everybody else, whether political party or army or military commander, you now try to clothe your motives. You want to drape it in nationalist flag, and you look for the usual suspect, France. Let me make this very, very clear from the beginning. French policies in West Africa or in Africa as a whole has been obnoxious. French policy has been preposterous. It has been neocolonialism at its worst. In fact, if Nkrumah were alive, he probably will find a new term to describe what France has. French activities in Africa deserve to be condemned, and condemned by all. Having said that, I don't see French hand in, well, you see, this is the thing. At the very beginning, people said, oh, it's France that is behind the coup. For the first few days, that was what was all in the media. Oh, it's France that's behind the coup. Until the French now started condemning the coup. And then the coupists now turn around and started saying, actually they carried out the coup in order to protect their country against France. Yes, the French have troops there. Those troops deserve to go. Because if those troops had been there, and yet the terrorism activity in the Sahel, whether in Mali or in Niger or in Burkina Faso, have not been curtailed, and yet French troops have been there for 60 years, you wonder what have they been doing. Obviously, they have been looking after French interests and not the interests of the Africans. So the French troops deserve to go. So I am not defending France at all. But as a scholar, I don't see ECOWAS policies being in tandem with French policy. The French has its own interests, which is to protect its economic interests. ECOWAS' interest was to regard the coup in Niger as a threat to their own stability and safety in their own countries. They don't want the spread of coups into their own territories. That's why they felt they had to draw the line in Niger. So that does not mean that ECOWAS is being teleguided by France or that Nigeria is being teleguided by France. Both parallel policies, both have their reasons for opposing the coup, but it does not mean that France is teleguiding ECOWAS. ECOWAS is trying to defend even their own sovereignty, their own safety, to prevent the virus of coups spreading into their country. That's the motivation. That is what is motivating ECOWAS, while France has its own motivation, and the two are not the same.
I mean, talking about policies, Prof, and trying to safeguard one's own territory, especially those who have questioned the quality of governance in Africa and the reason for the rise of these coups. Prof, you will remember one of the major reasons coupists here in Nigeria in the past coup have given is bad governance. They will say there is a high level of corruption, and that's why they have intervened. I'd like to get your view on a local political dynamics in Nigeria. A leader in the APC who has written an open letter to President Tinubu, who says that, and I read a portion to you, Prof. It says, Your Excellency, throughout the 2023 electoral campaigns, one of the strong campaign points was that you know how to find talent. When it took you more than 8 weeks to nominate your ministers, the belief was that you are taking your time to identify indisputably proficient people. With due respect to all those you nominated, many party members and extension Nigerians were disappointed. It is clear to any discerning mind that political consideration eclipsed any other factor. Definitely no argument about talent can be sustained as it is, both as party members and as Nigerians. Our expectation from your government has crashed. That is a leader in the APC commenting on President Tinubu's choice of cabinet members. What are your views on President Tinubu's cabinet formation, Prof?
Sheung, keep me completely out of APC affair. Keep me completely out of the politics of, well, this is going to sound, convoluted, but keep me completely out of the politics of politicians in Nigeria. I wouldn't go batting, or I wouldn't go to war or on behalf of the politicians in Nigeria. Let us frame this debate or this conversation this way. You are absolutely right when you started by saying coups had been motivated by bad governance. You are absolutely right. Not only bad governance, but there's something that has now crept into the language of the political scientists, and that is civilian coups. This is when you have a sitting president who manipulates the constitution, his own constitution. He manipulates it for term elongation. There are even some who scrap the concept of term limitation completely and now say we are starting afresh. Central African Republic has just done so. Haven't completed the regulation 2 terms. He now says he introduced a new constitutional amendment now of 7 years, starting with him. His Supreme Court threw out that amendment. And what did he do? He dismissed, he removed members of the Supreme Court and assembled new judges. And then he called on his people to have a referendum. Of course, his people, quote unquote, adopted the referendum. Now that is a civilian coup, which deserves to be condemned. The president of Senegal toyed with the idea of term elongation until Senegalese poured into the streets. People got killed, riots within cities, destruction of goods, until he now backed off that, well, no, he will not go for a term elongation. And even when they keep within the term, the corruption is so endemic that politicians get fat while the people lose weight. The devastating state of our economies in Africa, we don't deserve that. Our resources are there, but are these resources are the resources, implemented in the interest of the people, to protect the people, to advance the interest of the people? Absolutely not. And so these are the things that have now led to people coining the term civilian coup. And what I would suggest, both for ECOWAS and for the African Union, and hopefully they can take it to the UN and get the UN to adopt it, is let us have a charter of democracy. A charter of democracy where we will identify anti-democratic acts and where we will then identify the sanctions against sitting governments that seek to derail the democracy of their own countries. And the same kind of sanctions which you then table against military coupists, you also table against civilian coupists. Of course, it's easy for me to say this. The Americans have a saying, Do turkeys ever vote for Christmas? How many of the sitting head of states will vote for that charter of democracy, especially if that charter comes with sanctions which can be implemented? They won't vote for it. So how do we now, how do we activate a charter for democracy? Is by arguing for it, by civil society, by the media, pointing out that the greatest and easiest cause of coups in Africa is civilian anti-democratic behavior. Maybe that will now draw it into their head. But do we now say that there are good coups and bad coups? Theoretically, you could argue that. But in actual practice, we have to take a stand that all coups are bad.
All right. Prof, please stay with me for a moment because I need to go on a commercial break. And when we come back, our conversation will continue. We take a break, everyone. Professor Bolaji Akinyemi is still with us on the program. We'll be right back after now. Thank you so much, everyone, for staying with us on the program. Tonight, Professor Bolaji Akinyemi, a former External Affairs Minister, has been speaking with us. He's a professor of political science. Thank you so much indeed, Prof, for giving us insights on the coup situation in Niger, the intervention of President Tinubu, who is a leader in ECOWAS, and some of how those scenarios are playing out or affecting the local situation in the country. And I'd like to get your view on what is happening within the Nigerian context. For example, what has become a major concern is the impact of fuel subsidy on the prices of most commodities in the market. Recently, a leader of the NLC, the president of NLC, is warning that should there be any kind of hike in the price of the product again, there will be reaction from labor. But how do you think this situation can be managed? It definitely has affected every Nigerian in every strata.
Yes, I mean, one must admit that it has. One must admit that there are actions of branches of government that have not proved encouraging. If you are going to ask for your people to tighten their belts, then the political class must be seen to also to be tightening their belt. And that has not been evident. It is the opposite that we have seen. Removal of subsidy, everybody. Again, there's a consensus that it's got to go, that it has to be removed. The question now is, how do you cushion the effect of the removal of subsidy on people? How do you cushion the effect? Not that it will not have an effect, but how do you cushion that effect? I'm not an economist, and frankly, I often hesitate to divert from my specialty into areas that I am not well grounded. Because one of the things that I have found irritating on the issue of Niger is how everybody has become a foreign policy expert. Everybody, even when they don't know what they are talking about. Two, people are using it to try and score points. I welcome. I'm sorry, I'm drifting away from the subsidy. I'll get back to it. But I think there's an issue that I don't want to sweep under the carpet. I welcome the intervention of the Muslim clerics, because you see, in diplomacy, there is something we call soft diplomacy. You use factors that can achieve your objectives. Or I think the language that is used now is kinetic versus non-kinetic. I prefer the old term, use soft diplomacy that's available to you. And you see, diplomacy is one of these special areas where several different keys will open the door. Normally, a door has only one key that can open it. But in diplomacy, there are several keys, the hard keys, the soft keys. And the intervention of these ulamas, the Muslim clerics, I welcome it, because if it is going to get the other side to the dialogue table, when it has rejected approaches, what is wrong with that? Of course, there are people who have warned, and a good friend of mine had actually, spoken to me that be careful, because in Niger there are several factors and several factions, and the religious faction is just one of those. Fine, I accept that. After all, one should be careful about getting on the top of a tiger, of riding a tiger, because the only way you will get off the back of a tiger is to end up inside the tiger if you are not careful. So you also have to look for other factions that can constitute interventionist factions that are not necessarily religious. But I welcome the intervention of the religious. But as you can see, yesterday, you thought there was a movement forward. Today now, there's a movement backwards. That is not progress. The decision to try the former president is not a step in the right direction. Because as ECOWAS has rightly pointed out, then what are you coming to dialogue about? If you've already made up your mind, to hang the criminal or to hang the accused before the trial, then what are you coming to dialogue about? But nevertheless, doors have creaked open, and I think we should be exploiting several doors being creaked open to keep dialogue on the table. So, having said that, let me go back to what you said about the subsidy. And I think the advice that one should give government is hurry up about whatever palliatives you intend to put on the table. Hurry up. I think it was a mistake for us, the political and the media elite. It was a mistake for us to have stampeded the Tinubu administration into withdrawing that 8,000 naira that he was putting forward for the poor for 6 months. Those of us who live in the city came up with the argument that what will 8,000 do? What will it achieve? How many of us in the city send more than 5,000 to our parents in the village? How many? 8,000 could make a lot of difference to people in the rural areas where the majority of Nigerians live. But instead, we stampeded the government into changing its mind that, okay, it will be reviewed. No new figure had come up. No new figure is being implemented. And so let again that be a lesson to those of us in the urban areas that we are not the only Nigerians. That it's not only our interests that constitute the national interest. But whatever it is, I hope that the government will hurry up to bring out specifics of these palliatives and assuage the hunger and the anger of the people on the streets and the people in the rural area. That's the first point I would like to make. The second one, I already made reference to it in passing. I think that the executive and the legislature should put their two heads together and stop this insensitive allowances that have been voted for members of the executive. The legislature. It is indecent. It should never have happened. They are not on the same page as the executive. I'm talking about the legislatures. They are not on the same page. And thank God that because there are some elements within the legislature who still have a conscience, we have access now to the figures they are voting for themselves. And I think it's incredulous. They don't encourage people to tighten their belts if they are not going to tighten their own belts. So that's really all I can say in general, because I'm not an economist.
And I'd like to anchor on this note, Prof. I'd like to get for someone who has served at that level as a cabinet minister, and we have an understanding of what it is and how to maintain the trust of the Nigerian people in the midst of a very difficult situation. The floating of the Naira has also had its ripple effect. In the market, Naira dollars sells of up to over 900 Naira. That has not happened in my very short stay here on earth. I've not seen that incredulous level of rise in the disparity between the Naira and the dollar. And food prices have also shot up. And in fact, name any commodity in the market that is not really incredibly high today. How do you then manage that kind of situation? There is anger, there is hunger, and a government that is just how many days old? What can a government like that do? What are your views on the way forward? Nigerians are definitely very, very upset about some of the situation, isn't it?
Yes, you are right. And what the government needs to be aware and be careful about is what I will call the father-in-law tortoise syndrome in Nigerian culture. The father-in-law tortoise syndrome. You recall this story, I'm sure everybody knows about this story, where the tortoise went to steal yam from his father-in-law's farm. So the father-in-law grabbed him, they tied him to a tree on the road to the market. And everybody who was going to the market in the morning was pouring abuse on the tortoise for what he had done. On their way back from the farm, the tortoise was still there, tied. And they said, wait a minute. Did he kill the man? In any case, the yam is stole. Was he not going to use it to feed the man's daughter? Views changed, attitudes changed, and now it was the father-in-law who was now being cursed. That shows what I will call the patience deficiency in our culture. Nigerians are not a patient people. Maybe because we've been so brutalized from 1960 when we became independent up till now. We've become so brutalized that we are not prepared to give any government a chance. The time that a government has to retain the loyalty of the people is very short in this country. And a government should stop behaving as if it has all the time in the world, not when it comes to dealing with Nigerians. You don't. You ask me, what's the way forward? Well, I have already identified two, but let me repeat them. The first is that the palliatives should really be put on the table. As I said, I'm not an economist, but if I, at my elementary level, can think of, if I were the president, I would bring back that 8,000. If you like, accuse me of flip-flopping, I will bring back that 8,000. Or if I want to really justify the fact that I withdrew it in the first place, I will make it 9,000 or make it 10,000. Then at least I can justify the fact that I have increased it. That's the first one. The second one, the administration should abolish tuition at every level, primary, secondary, tertiary. Now, you will say to me, yeah, but the federal government does not have primary schools. So what are you talking about, Prof? I know. It is the states who have primary schools. Tell the states you will compensate them for removing tuition in their primary schools. The federal government and the states should abolish also tuition in the secondary schools. Yeah. You see, Mama who is selling groundnut beside the road has a child in the primary school. She does. Even probably has two. When you remove the tuition at that level, she feels it immediately. It's not none about this World Bank theories. She feels it immediately. So look for measures like that and implement them.
Right.
If I were president, I will call in my vice president. I will say, let us announce 50% of our salaries we are cutting for the next 1 year. In any case, they don't need those salaries. I mean, after all, they live in government houses, they eat government food. Yes. So,
I must sincerely, we're totally out of time, Prof. But I must sincerely thank you. Some very insightful perspective that you have given tonight. Thank you so much indeed, Prof. And I'm so happy that you're able to join us tonight. Thank you so much indeed, Prof.
Thank you, Sheung. Thank you for having me on your program.
Professor Akinyemi, a former Minister of Veterinary Affairs and a Professor of Political Science. That's our show for tonight, everyone. Many thanks for watching. I'm Sean Kimale. Good night.